Some objects are just objects. A watch, a necklace, a ring, you wear them, you lose them, you forget them. But every now and then, one small thing carries so much weight, so much love, so much heartbreak, so much history that it stops being an object at all. It becomes a witness. It sees a woman fall in love. It sees her walk down the aisle in front of the whole world. It sees her cry alone at night. It stays on her finger through the happiest days and the loneliest ones. And then, one terrible summer, it is taken off her hand for the very last time. This is the story of one such ring. A deep blue sapphire wrapped in a circle of diamonds that once sat on the hand of the most famous woman on the planet. When Princess Diana died, that ring did not simply disappear into a vault. It waited, it passed quietly through the hands of a grieving son, and then years later it did something almost no one expected. It appeared again, in front of billions of eyes, on the hand of a young woman named Kate Middleton. But the real shock was not that the ring came back. The real shock was who gave it up, and what that decision revealed about a young prince the world thought it already understood. To understand why that decision moved so many people to tears, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. Back to a nervous 19-year-old girl, a briefcase full of jewels, and a choice she was never really supposed to make for herself. It was the winter of 1981. In the grand, quiet rooms of Windsor Castle, a young woman named Lady Diana Spencer was about to have her life changed forever. She was only 19 years old. Just a few years earlier, she had been an ordinary girl, working as a nursery assistant, sharing a flat with friends in London, riding her bicycle through the city like anyone else. She was shy. She blushed easily. She had a soft, almost childlike way of looking down when the cameras flashed. And yet, somehow, this gentle young woman had caught the attention of the future King of England. Prince Charles, the heir to the British throne, had chosen her. And on the 6th of February, 1981, in a private room at Windsor Castle, he asked her to marry him. The story goes that he proposed to her surrounded by flowers in a cozy nursery room far away from the noise of the world. For Diana, it must have felt like something out of a fairy tale. A real prince, a real castle, a real proposal. But even in that magical moment, there was a small, strange voice inside her. Later, she would admit that even as she said yes, a quiet part of her wondered what kind of future she was really stepping into. She was so young. She barely knew the man she was agreeing to marry, and she had no idea at all of the storm of fame, pressure, and heartbreak that waited for her on the other side of that yes. But in that moment, she pushed the worry aside. She was in love, or at least she believed she was, and she said yes. Now came a decision that would, in its own quiet way, become historic. Diana needed an engagement ring. For most royal brides before her, this was not really a decision at all. Tradition was strict and heavy. A future queen was expected to wear a ring that was specially made just for her, a one-of-a-kind piece, custom-designed, never seen before and never to be seen again on anyone else. That was the royal way, exclusive, bespoke, made to order. But Diana was different right from the start. When the time came to choose her ring, the royal jeweler, a famous London house called Garrard, arrived with a tray of options. And here is the charming little detail that shows just how secret the whole thing was. The jewels were reportedly brought in quietly, hidden away, under the cover story that they were there for Prince Andrew to pick out a signet ring for his upcoming 21st birthday. It was a small trick to keep the real reason hidden from watching eyes. A briefcase was opened. Inside lay a small collection of beautiful rings. And Diana, this shy 19-year-old who was still learning how to be a princess, was given a rare and wonderful freedom. She was allowed to choose the one she liked best. Her eyes moved over the sparkling options, and then she saw it. A large, deep blue sapphire, oval in shape, glowing with a rich and vivid color, surrounded by a neat halo of small white diamonds. It was bold, it was bright. It was, in fact, the largest stone in the collection. And Diana, following her heart rather than any rule, pointed to that one. That was the ring she wanted. It was a 12-carat oval sapphire, mined in the faraway island of Ceylon, the land we now call Sri Lanka. Ceylon sapphires are famous around the world for a very special reason. Unlike some sapphires that can look dark or almost black when you take them indoors, Ceylon stones seem to hold onto their light. They stay bright and alive, glowing a clean, open blue no matter what kind of light falls on them. It was as if the stone had a small flame trapped inside it that simply refused to go out. Around that glowing blue heart sat 14 sparkling diamonds, and the whole thing was set in a band of white gold. There was something almost poetic about her choice, though few people realized it at the time. The design of the ring quietly echoed a piece of jewelry from more than 100 years earlier. Long ago, on the night before her wedding in the year 1840, Queen Victoria had received a beautiful sapphire and diamond brooch as a gift from the man she adored, Prince Albert. The style of Diana's new ring seemed to reach back across all those years and link her, one royal bride to another, to that older story of love. Without meaning to, this modern 19-year-old had picked a ring that carried the ghost of a much older romance inside its design. But not everyone was pleased with her choice. Behind the palace walls, some eyebrows were raised. You see, Diana's ring was not custom-made. It was not a secret, unique creation designed only for her. It was a ring that, in theory, anyone with enough money could have walked into a shop and bought. It came straight out of the jeweler's existing collection, right out of that briefcase. To some members of the royal family and the old royal circle, this felt wrong. It broke the tradition. A future queen, they whispered, should not be wearing something that was simply available for public purchase. It was seen as unusual, even a little improper. But Diana didn't care about any of that. She loved the ring. She loved its size, its color, its brightness. And in choosing it, she was quietly doing something that would define her entire life in the years to come. She was following her own heart, even when tradition told her to do something else. That small act of choosing the ring she loved, rather than the ring she was supposed to have, was one of the first tiny signs of the woman she would become. A woman who would break rules. A woman who would follow her own feelings. A woman the whole world would fall in love with precisely because she was so real. At the time, the ring cost around £28,000. In those days, that was a large sum, but it was hardly the most expensive treasure in the royal collection. No one buying it in 1980 one could possibly have guessed what it would one day be worth, not in money, but in meaning. Because the true value of this ring was never really about carats or price tags. Its true value would come from the story it was about to live through. And so, with the ring chosen, the engagement was made official. The photographs were taken, and the world got its first proper look at Lady Diana Spencer, the shy young woman who was going to marry the future king. In those early pictures, you can see the ring on her finger, that big blue sapphire catching the light. You can also see the nervousness in her smile, the way she seemed almost overwhelmed by the sudden explosion of attention around her. What followed was a wedding unlike anything the modern world had ever seen. On a summer's day, Diana became the Princess of Wales in a ceremony so grand, so beautiful, so watched, that hundreds of millions of people around the globe stopped everything to see it. She wore a dress with a train so long it seemed to flow forever behind her. Crowds packed the streets. Church bells rang. And on her hand, quietly, sat that sapphire ring, the ring she had chosen herself from a briefcase, the ring that was now suddenly one of the most photographed pieces of jewelry on Earth. Overnight, Diana became the most famous woman in the world. Everything about her was studied, copied, and adored. Women everywhere wanted her haircut, they wanted her clothes, and they wanted her ring. In fact, her sapphire engagement ring became so beloved that jewelers around the world began making copies of it, so that ordinary women could wear something that looked like the ring of a real-life princess. The design she had picked in a private room at the palace was now being worn by countless people who would never meet her, but who felt, somehow, connected to her through that beautiful blue stone. For a time, the fairy tale seemed real. Diana smiled for the cameras. She had 2 sons, first William, then Harry, and she poured her whole heart into being their mother. The ring stayed on her hand through it all, through royal tour, through grand events, through the births of her boys, through the endless flashing of cameras. But behind the smiles, that quiet worry Diana had felt on the day she said yes was slowly growing into something much heavier. The fairy tale, it turned out, had cracks in it. The marriage between Diana and Charles was not the happy love story the world imagined. There was distance between them. There was loneliness. There was pain that the public could not see. Diana, so full of warmth and longing to be loved, found herself feeling isolated inside the very palace walls that were supposed to be her home. And through all of that private heartbreak, the ring stayed on her hand. It had seen the happiest day of her life. Now it was seeing the hardest years too. It sat on her finger during the good public moments and the terrible private ones. In a strange way, it became a silent companion to everything she was going through, the one steady thing that never left her, even as so much else fell apart. Eventually, the cracks became too deep to hide. After years of struggle, Diana and Charles separated, and finally, in the mid-1990s, they divorced. It was a painful, public ending to a marriage that had begun with so much hope. The whole world watched the fairy tale come undone. And here is where the ring story takes a quiet, powerful turn. When a marriage ends, most people would expect the engagement ring to be put away, hidden in a drawer, forgotten as a painful reminder of what was lost. But Diana did something different. She kept wearing it. Even after the divorce, even after the marriage was officially over, Diana continued to wear that sapphire ring. Not, it seems, as a symbol of a romance that had failed. That romance was gone. She wore it because somewhere along the way it had simply become one of her favorite pieces of jewelry. It was hers. She had chosen it herself all those years ago from a briefcase against the rules. It had been with her through everything, and she was not about to give it up now. Think about what that means. This ring had watched her fall in love as a teenager. It had watched her become a princess. It had watched her marriage bloom and then slowly wither. It had watched her cry and it had watched her laugh. And even after the man who gave it to her was no longer her husband, the ring stayed. It had stopped being about Charles a long time ago. Now it was about Diana. It was a piece of her taste, her boldness, her heart. In the years after her divorce, Diana became something the world had never quite seen before. Free from the unhappy marriage, she stepped fully into her own light. She became a champion for people who were suffering. She walked through hospitals and held the hands of patients that others were afraid to touch. She comforted the sick, the poor, the forgotten. She used her enormous fame not for herself, but to shine a light on people the world ignored. She became known, all over the globe, as the people's princess, a woman whose kindness felt genuine, whose warmth reached ordinary people in a way that royalty almost never did. And through all of it, that sapphire ring stayed on her hand. It had become as much a part of her as her smile. But of course, the world knows how this story turns. It knows the terrible summer that was coming. In the year 1997, Diana's life was cut short in a sudden, shocking tragedy that stopped the entire world in grief. In an instant, the most famous woman on the planet, the loving mother, the people's princess, the shy girl who had once chosen a blue ring from a briefcase, was gone. She was only 36 years old. The world wept for her in a way it had rarely wept for anyone. Millions of people, most of whom had never met her, felt as though they had lost someone from their own family. Flowers piled up in mountains outside the palace gates. Strangers cried in the streets. And two young boys, William and Harry, were left without their mother, the woman who had loved them more than anything in the world. In the middle of all that unimaginable grief, few people were thinking about a ring. And why would they be? A piece of jewelry seemed so small, so unimportant next to the loss of a person so loved. But that sapphire ring, the one Diana had worn through her whole extraordinary life, had not stopped its journey. Its story was far from over. Because now, with Diana gone, a quiet question hung in the air, a question that would not be answered for many years, and that, when it finally was, would move the hearts of people all over the world. What would happen to the ring? The ring that had seen everything. The ring that had been part of Diana herself. Where would it go now? Whose hand would it rest on next? The answer to that question begins with two grieving brothers, a private choice made in the shadow of terrible loss, and a decision by one young prince that no one saw coming. And that is where the next chapter of this remarkable story truly begins. The morning of Diana's funeral is a memory burned into the minds of millions. And at the very center of that ocean of grief walked two small figures who broke the heart of the entire world. Prince William, just 15 years old. Prince Harry, only 12. Two boys, dressed in dark suits, walking slowly behind their mother's coffin through the silent streets of London, their heads bowed, their faces pale and still. Behind them stretched a sea of flowers and weeping strangers. Ahead of them lay a future without the one person who had loved them most fiercely in all the world. No child should ever have to make that walk. And yet there they were, holding themselves together in front of billions of watching eyes, doing the impossible. In that moment, the world stopped seeing them as distant royal children and started seeing them as what they truly were, two little boys who had just lost their mum. What people did not see in those raw and terrible days were the quieter moments that came after the cameras were switched off. The private grief, the empty rooms, the slow, painful work of trying to understand that their mother was really gone and was never coming back. For William and Harry, Diana had not been a distant figure on magazine covers. She had been the one who hugged them, who laughed with them, who sneaked them out for ordinary fun, who wanted more than anything for them to grow up feeling loved and normal. Now that warmth was simply missing. In the middle of that loss, a small and tender decision was made. The boys were given the chance to keep pieces of their mother's jewelry, personal treasures that had belonged to Diana, so that they might hold on to a small physical piece of her. It was a way of letting her sons carry something of her forward into their lives, something they could keep close. Two brothers, a collection of their mother's most personal belongings, and a quiet choice to make. William, the older of the two, chose their mother's gold Cartier watch. It was a beautiful, practical thing, something he could wear, something that had rested on Diana's own wrist, something that would tick along quietly beside him through the years to come. Every time he checked the time, in a small way, she would be there. And Harry, the younger brother, the one who had been just 12 years old on that awful walk, made his own choice. From all of his mother's treasures, he chose the sapphire engagement ring. That deep blue stone, wrapped in its halo of diamonds, the very ring Diana had picked out for herself as a nervous 19-year-old, the ring she had worn through her entire remarkable life, the ring she had refused to take off even after her marriage ended. Of all the things he could have kept, young Harry reached for that. It is easy to imagine why. That ring, more than almost anything else, had been part of his mother's daily life. It had been on her hand when she held him, when she tucked him in, when she laughed, and when she cried. To a grieving boy, it may have felt like the closest thing to holding her hand again. And so the ring passed quietly from Diana to her younger son. It became Harry's, his treasure, his one precious piece of his mother, chosen by him and belonging to him. And then, for a very long time, the ring disappeared from the world's view. For over a decade, that famous sapphire stayed hidden away, safe and private. It did not appear on magazine covers. It was not photographed on anyone's hand. It simply waited quietly as the two boys who had lost their mother slowly grew into young men. The world moved on. New stories filled the newspapers, and through all those years, almost no one gave a single thought to where Diana's ring had gone. Only a small circle of people even knew that it now belonged to Harry. To everyone else, it was simply a beautiful memory attached to a princess who was gone. But while the ring rested in the dark, life carried on, and a new story was beginning to take shape, one that would eventually bring that hidden sapphire back into the light in the most touching way imaginable. That story begins in the year 2001, in a small, windswept university town on the coast of Scotland called St. Andrews. William, now a young man, had chosen to study there, far from the noise of London, trying to live something close to a normal student life. And among the crowd of fresh new students arriving that same year was a young woman named Kate Middleton, Kate, as everyone called her. Kate was not a princess. She was not from a grand royal family. She came from a warm, hardworking, ordinary background. Her parents had built a successful business from the ground up, and Kate had grown up down-to-earth, friendly, and steady. When she arrived at St. Andrews, she was simply another student, carrying her bags to her dormitory, nervous and excited like everyone else. She had no idea that the shy young man she was about to meet would one day change the entire course of her life. At first, William and Kate were just friends. They lived in the same student hall. They shared the same subjects. They ran in the same circle of friends. There was no grand romance, no lightning bolt, no fairy tale first glance, just two young people getting to know each other in the ordinary rhythm of university life. They studied together. They laughed together. They became comfortable with each other in the easy, unhurried way that real friendships grow. And slowly, without either of them quite planning it, that friendship began to turn into something more. They moved into a shared house with a few other friends, living together as ordinary students, cooking, studying, and spending their days side by side. In that close, everyday closeness, William came to see something in Kate that he had perhaps not found anywhere else. Someone who treated him not as a prince, not as a future king, but simply as William. Someone real, someone he could trust. There is a famous moment from those university days that many people still talk about. At a student charity fashion show, Kate walked down the runway, and William, sitting in the audience, is said to have looked at his friend in a completely new way that night. Whether that single evening changed everything or not, one thing became clear over time. The friendship had quietly become love. And by the years that followed, William and Kate were a couple. But loving a prince was never going to be simple. As their relationship grew, so did the attention. The newspapers noticed. The photographers started following. And Kate, this ordinary young woman who had done nothing except fall in love, suddenly found herself under a spotlight so harsh and constant that it would have broken many people. Cameras waited outside her home. Her every outfit was studied. Her every move was reported. The years rolled on. William finished his studies and began his military career, training to serve as an officer, spending long stretches away from Kate. The couple were together for years, 5 long years, and still no engagement came. And the press, cruel as it can be, gave Kate a mocking nickname. They called her Weighty Katie, painting her as a woman endlessly waiting around for a prince who would not commit. It was unkind and unfair. But Kate, showing the quiet strength that would later define her, held her head high and simply carried on. She did not complain in public. She did not lash out. She endured. And then, in the year 2007, the story nearly ended forever. After years together, the pressure, the distance, and the uncertainty finally caught up with them. William, still a young man in his mid-20s, pulled away. He was not ready to commit. He felt too young to promise forever. And so, painfully, the couple broke up. For Kate, it was a heartbreak played out in front of the entire world. The woman who had waited so long suddenly left behind. The newspapers, which had mocked her for waiting, now buzzed with the news that the great royal romance was over. But here is where Kate showed exactly the kind of woman she was. She did not fall apart. She did not disappear in tears. Instead, she picked herself up. She went out. She spent time with her family and friends. She threw herself into life, joining an all-female rowing crew, staying active, staying strong, refusing to let the world see her broken. She carried on with dignity and grace, and in doing so, she reminded William of exactly what he had walked away from. The separation did not last long. Within just a few months, William realized the truth that had been staring him in the face all along. He had made a mistake. The distance only proved how much he wanted her back. And so the couple reunited, older now, wiser, and far more certain of what they meant to each other. The breakup, painful as it had been, had done something important. It had tested their love and shown them both, beyond any doubt, that they belonged together. From that point on, everything was different. William was no longer a boy afraid of forever. He was a man who knew with complete certainty that Kate Middleton was the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. She had waited. She had endured the cruel nickname, the harsh cameras, the heartbreak, and the long years of uncertainty. And through all of it, she had never lost her warmth, her patience, or her quiet strength. She had proven herself, again and again, to be exactly the partner William needed by his side. And so, William began to think seriously about the biggest question of his life. He was going to propose. He was going to ask Kate to marry him. But a proposal needs a ring, and not just any ring. William wanted this to be perfect. He wanted it to mean something. He wanted more than anything for his mother to somehow be part of this moment, the mother who had been taken from him when he was just 15, the mother who would never get to meet the woman he loved, who would never share in the joy of his engagement, his wedding, his children. Diana would miss all of it, and that thought sat heavily on William's heart. There was, of course, one object in the whole world that could bring his mother into this moment more powerfully than anything else. That deep blue sapphire ring. The ring Diana had chosen herself. The ring she had worn through her entire life. The ring that had been part of her in a way almost nothing else had. There was just one problem. The ring was not William's to give. It belonged to Harry. For all those years, the sapphire ring had rested safely in the keeping of the younger brother, the boy who had chosen it as his one precious link to their mother. It was Harry's treasure, his inheritance, his piece of Diana. By every right, it was his to keep, his to hold onto, his to one day give to a woman he might love. If Harry kept the ring, then one day it might sit on the hand of Harry's own future wife. That was his to decide. And this is the heart of the whole story, the quiet, private moment that the world would not learn about for years, but which, when it finally came to light, would move so many people to tears. According to the account later shared by one of the people closest to the family, when Harry understood that his older brother wanted to propose to Kate, he did not hesitate. He did not cling to his treasure. Instead, this young man, the same little boy who had chosen the ring to feel close to his mother, offered it up. He gave it to William so that Kate could wear their mother's ring. As the account goes, Harry felt it was only right. It made sense to him that their mother's ring should be worn by the woman who would one day stand beside William as his queen. He is said to have felt that it was fitting for the future to carry Diana forward, that one day, through this ring, a piece of their mother would sit upon the throne of England itself. Think about the weight of that decision. This ring was the one thing Harry had kept from his mother, his single most precious possession, the object he had reached for as a grieving 12-year-old boy because it made him feel in some small way that she was still near. He could have kept it forever. He could have saved it for the woman he himself would one day marry. No one would have blamed him. No one would have even asked him to give it up. And yet, without being forced, without any pressure, Harry handed over his greatest treasure, the last, closest link to his mother, so that his older brother could have his perfect moment. and so that the woman William loved could carry Diana into her new life. It was an act of pure, quiet, selfless love, not the kind of thing done for cameras or headlines. It was done in private, brother to brother, with no expectation of thanks or praise. That single gesture said everything about the two boys Diana had raised. She had poured her whole heart into teaching her sons to be kind, to be loving, to think of others before themselves. And in that quiet moment, one brother giving up his most treasured possession so the other could be happy, you could see, clear as day, exactly the kind of mother she had been. Her sons had grown into men who carried her kindness inside them. The ring, which had waited in the dark for more than a decade, was finally ready to return to the light. It had traveled a long and remarkable road, chosen by a nervous 19-year-old girl, worn through a lifetime of love and heartbreak, passed to a grieving little boy, hidden away for years, and now, at last, handed with love from one brother to another. But its journey was not over. In fact, its most public and unforgettable moment was still to come, in a quiet lodge, high on a mountain in the wild heart of Africa, where William would finally get down on one knee, hold his mother's ring in a trembling hand, and ask Kate Middleton the most important question of his life. And what happened when the world finally saw that ring again, and later learned the astonishing truth of whose hand had really given it up, would touch hearts all around the globe. That is where this story reaches its unforgettable end. High in the wild heart of Africa, far from palaces and cameras and the endless noise of royal life, there is a lonely spot on the slopes of Mount Kenya. It sits more than 10,000 feet above the sea, wrapped in cold mountain air and silence, surrounded by nothing but wilderness. There are no crowds up there, no photographers. No electricity, even just two simple log cabins, warmed by open fires and lit by candlelight, looking out over a still, quiet lake. It is one of the most remote and private places a person could ever hope to find. And it was here, in this hidden corner of the world, that Prince William chose to change his life forever. It was October of 2010. William and Kate had traveled to Kenya together, a country that held a deep and tender place in William's heart. This was not a random choice. Africa was the very place his father had brought him and Harry in the raw, painful days after their mother died. For William, this land was tied to healing, to family, to comfort in the darkest of times. When he thought about where in all the world he wanted to ask Kate to marry him, he could think of nowhere more fitting than this. If he was going to take the biggest step of his life, he wanted to take it here, in a place that meant something to his very soul. But there was one detail he had been guarding with almost desperate care. Tucked away in his backpack, wrapped and hidden, was a small object worth more to him than anything he owned. His mother's sapphire ring. The ring Harry had given him. The ring Diana had chosen for herself as a nervous teenager and worn through her entire remarkable life. William would later admit that he had been carrying that ring around in his rucksack for 3 whole weeks before the proposal, and that he had barely let it out of his sight for a single moment. Everywhere he went, he kept hold of it, terrified that if it somehow disappeared, he would be in the most enormous trouble imaginable. Imagine the pressure of it. Of all the rings in the world, this was perhaps the most famous and the most irreplaceable. It was not just jewelry. It was his mother. And he was carrying it up a mountain in a backpack, guarding it like the treasure it truly was. And here is a small, human, almost funny detail that makes the whole thing feel wonderfully real. William, this future king, was so nervous about the proposal that he did something quite bold. He decided not to ask Kate's father for permission beforehand. Why? Because a part of him was afraid that her father might actually say no. So he kept the whole plan close to his chest and simply hoped for the best. At last, in that quiet cabin by the lake, with the fire crackling and the candles glowing and the vast African wilderness stretching out silent all around them, the moment came. William got down on one knee. He held out his mother's ring, that deep blue sapphire that had waited in the dark for over a decade, and he asked Kate Middleton to marry him. For Kate, it came as a complete surprise. They had been traveling with friends, and she truly had not expected it at all. But when the moment came, and the man she had loved through nearly a decade of waiting, heartbreak, and quiet strength knelt before her holding out a ring, there was only ever going to be one answer. She said yes. And in that instant, everything changed. The ordinary girl from an ordinary family, the young woman the cruel newspapers had once mocked as weighty Katie, the one who had endured years of pressure with her head held high, she was going to be a princess. And more than that, one day she was going to be a queen. Before they left that little cabin, the newly engaged couple did something sweetly ordinary. They signed the lodge's guest book, leaving behind small, happy notes, the kind of thing any pair of lovebirds might scribble after a perfect holiday. No one reading those cheerful little messages could have guessed that they had just witnessed the making of a future king and queen. That was exactly how William wanted it. Real, private, theirs. But of course, a moment this big could not stay private for long. On the 16th of November, 2010, the news the world had been waiting years to hear was finally announced. Prince William and Kate Middleton were engaged to be married. And when the couple stepped out together to face the cameras for the first time as an engaged pair, every eye on the planet went straight to one thing. The ring. There it was, back in the light at last, glowing on Kate's hand for all the world to see. That unmistakable blue sapphire wrapped in its halo of diamonds. Millions of people who had grown up watching Diana, who had wept when she died, who had never forgotten her, felt their hearts skip. They knew that ring. They knew it instantly. It was Diana's, and now it sat on the hand of the young woman William loved. For so many people, seeing that ring again was an overwhelming, emotional thing. It was as if a small piece of the beloved princess had returned to the world after being gone for so long. In one quiet gesture, William had found a way to bring his mother into the happiest moment of his life. She could not be there. She would never meet Kate, never dance at the wedding, never hold her grandchildren. But through that ring, she was present. She was part of it. In a small and beautiful way, Diana was there. William himself spoke about it with a tenderness that moved everyone who heard him. He explained that it was his mother's ring, and that it was deeply special to him, just as Kate was now deeply special to him too. And so, he felt, it was only right that the two of them should be brought together. He wanted his mother to be part of the joy, part of the excitement, part of all of it. Since she could not be there to share it in person, this was his way of keeping her close to everything that was about to happen. The response around the world was enormous. Overnight, sapphire engagement rings became the most wanted jewelry on Earth all over again, just as they had been decades earlier when Diana first wore it. History was repeating itself. A new generation fell in love with the same beautiful blue stone. And the following spring, on the 29th of April, 2011, William and Kate were married in a wedding watched by an estimated 2 billion people across the globe, one of the most viewed events in human history. Kate walked down the aisle as a princess, and on her hand, catching the light of that grand cathedral, was Diana's ring. The fairy tale, it seemed, had come full circle. The ring had found its way home. But the world still did not know the whole truth. There was one enormous piece of the story still hidden, a piece that, when it finally came out, would leave people around the globe stunned and deeply moved. For years, everyone simply assumed the ring had been William's to give. It was his mother's ring, after all, and he had used it to propose. It seemed obvious. What no one realized, what almost no one knew, was that the ring had never actually belonged to William at all. The truth finally came to light years later, in 2017, through the account of someone who had been very close to Diana during her life. And when it did, it changed the way people saw the whole story. Because the ring, it turned out, had been Harry's all along. It was Harry who had chosen it as a grieving 12-year-old boy. It was Harry who had kept it, safe and treasured, for all those years. And it was Harry, quietly, selflessly, asking for nothing in return, who had handed it over so that his older brother could propose to Kate. Suddenly, the whole story rearranged itself in people's minds. That famous, unforgettable proposal ring, the one the entire world had watched sparkle on Kate's hand, the one that had made 2 billion hearts flutter, it had been given up by the younger brother. Harry had surrendered his single most precious link to his mother, the one thing he had kept of her, so that William and Kate could have their perfect moment. And people were deeply moved when they understood what that truly meant, because there was a quiet cost to Harry's gift that most people had never even considered. By giving the ring away, Harry had given up the chance to one day put his own mother's ring on the hand of the woman he himself would marry. He could never get it back. When his own turn came to fall in love and propose, that beautiful sapphire would already be gone, worn by another woman, part of another love story. Harry had known that. And he had given it anyway. According to the account that revealed all this, Harry had felt it was simply the right thing to do. He believed it was fitting that their mother's ring should be worn by the woman who would one day stand beside William as queen, that through this ring, Diana herself would, in a sense, one day sit upon the throne of England. He had let go of his precious treasure, his one piece of his mother, and given it to his brother. And in that single act, the whole world could see the kind of heart Diana had raised in her youngest son. But this story has one more beautiful turn, a final piece that ties everything together and shows just how deeply both brothers carried their mother's love. When Harry's own time came to fall in love and propose, he found himself in exactly the situation his gift had created. He no longer had his mother's ring. It was on Kate's hand now. So Harry did something that showed the same tender heart all over again. When he decided to marry the woman he loved, Meghan, he designed a ring for her himself from scratch. At its center, he placed a stone from Botswana, a country that held special meaning for the two of them. But he did not stop there. On either side of that central stone, Harry set two smaller diamonds, and those two diamonds had belonged to his mother, taken from Diana's own personal collection. Think about what that means. Harry had given away his mother's whole ring so that Kate could wear it. But he had quietly held on to a few of his mother's diamonds, and years later, he wove them into the ring he gave to his own bride. So in the end, both brothers found a way to bring their mother into their marriages. William gave Kate Diana's ring. Harry gave Meghan Diana's diamonds. Two sons, each finding his own way to keep their beloved mother close, to make sure she was present at the most important moment of his life. When Harry proposed, Meghan understood exactly what those diamonds meant. She spoke of how much it meant to her that Diana was, in a way, part of their journey together with them, even though she could never be there in person. And so, in the end, the promise hidden inside Harry's quiet gift came true. That deep blue sapphire ring, chosen by a shy 19-year-old girl from a briefcase against all the rules, worn through a lifetime of love and heartbreak, taken off a princess's hand for the last time on a terrible summer's day, kept safe by a grieving little boy, hidden away in the dark for over a decade, and then handed with love from one brother to another. That ring is exactly where Harry said it would be. Today it rests on the hand of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, the woman who will one day stand as queen. Harry's words, spoken in private all those years ago, have quietly become real. Their mother's ring will indeed, one day, sit upon the throne of England. And when you stop and think about the whole extraordinary journey of that single ring, you begin to see that it was never really about a piece of jewelry at all. It was about love. A young girl's love, bold enough to choose her own ring against the rules. A mother's love, strong enough to raise two sons who would grow up to be selfless and kind. A son's love, deep enough to carry his mother up a mountain in a backpack so she could be part of his happiest day. And a brother's love, generous enough to give away his most treasured possession without being asked, expecting nothing in return. Diana is gone. She has been gone for a long time now. She never got to meet the women her sons would marry. She never got to see their weddings, or hold their children, or watch them grow into the men they have become. All of that was taken from her far too soon, and yet in the most beautiful way she is still here. She lives on in the kindness of her sons. She lives on in the diamonds Harry gave to Meghan. And most of all, she lives on in that glowing blue sapphire, still shining, still loved, still passing from one generation to the next. A small, bright piece of a mother's heart, carried forward by the children she loved more than anything in the world. Some objects are just objects, but every now and then one small thing carries so much love that it becomes something far greater. This ring saw a princess fall in love. It saw her heart break. It saw her leave the world too soon. And then, against all odds, it found its way back into the light, passed from a brother's hand, carried up an African mountain and slipped onto the finger of a future queen. Diana chose that ring herself, all those years ago, following her own heart. And somehow, even now, her heart is still shining on for all the world to see.